Obina moved without thinking, shoving Mira behind him, knife out. The first guard smiled, pitying, and advanced. Obina lunged, faster than the man expected, and caught him under the ribs. Blood came in a hot, sudden flower. The second stabbed, sliced Obina's shoulder. The third raised his spear and found his hands wrapped in Mira's hair before he could finish the arc. She had not reached for him. The hair had reached for her. It rose from her head like a tide and wrapped the spear shaft, the wrists, the throat. The guard made a strangled sound and dropped the weapon as the coils cinched. Mira screamed, not in triumph but in terror at her own body doing what it wanted. She grabbed at the strands, trying to peel them back. They tightened. The man's eyes bulged. Another second and something would break that cannot be unbroken. Obina's hand was on hers, knife in the other. "Mira," he said, voice steady, like talking to a skittish horse. "Look at me." She looked. His eyes steadied the world. "Let go," he said, hard. "I can't," she sobbed. "It isn't me." "Then let go of resisting," he said. "Choose it before it chooses for you." The sentence hit something hidden. She stopped fighting the hair and for the first time commanded it. "Release." The word did not pass her lips. It left her chest like a flare. The coils loosened. The guard dropped to his knees, gagging, alive. The hair slithered back, settling hot against her back like sweat. Every inch of her skin crawled. Darian's mouth hung open for a breath, then closed. He had seen something sacred and written it down as a weapon. He lifted his hand. More guards crested the ridge, a flood of metal and leather. "Enough games," he said. "Take him." Obina wiped his knife on his thigh and smiled without humor. "You can try." They crashed together. The ravine became riot. Mira moved without remembering the steps afterward. Shouts, blood, stone underfoot, the rip of fabric and the crack of wood. Her hair took men by the wrists and ankles, threw one into a rock so hard the sound of skull on stone rang like a gong. She gagged again and kept commanding because horror and power often share a bed. When it was over, 2 guards lay groaning, one lay too still, and Darian stood above them on the lip of the ravine with his cloak torn and his eyes bright with a fury that had cooled into patience. "Very well," he said. "Tonight then. Moonrise, Palace Court, kneel or he dies and your village with him." He turned his back and left them with the ruin. Silence filled with breath. Obina pressed his hand to his shoulder where blood seeped slow. Mira reached out. He swayed away gently. "I'm fine," he said. "You are not," she said. He smiled a fraction. "Then marry me while I'm still standing," he said, stubborn to the bone. "You fool," she whispered. "Yours," he said. They bound their wrists with a strip torn from her sash and spoke no words anyone else would recognize. Only the ones that had built themselves quietly inside their days of forest and laughter and jars of paste and broken comb teeth. When they were done, he kissed her forehead, quick, as if he had no right and still took it. "Now," he said, "we end this." "How?" she asked, exhausted enough to agree to anything and still too proud to show it. "By feeding the right thing," he said. He nodded toward her hair. "It is hunger without direction. Give it a direction before Darian gives it you." She thought of the mango-sweet hiss on the coals, of the way the hair tightened when she broke Valora's stalk. She thought of the mirror and the shadow that had worn her bald face like a threat. She thought, shame stabbing deep, of the split second when the guard's throat had fit perfectly in the noose her hair wanted him to wear. "Everything I feed it," she said, "it will want again." "Then feed it what it cannot own," he said. "What is that?" "Choice," he said simply. "And if that fails, feed it me." She slapped him. The sound cracked across stone. "Do not offer your life like a bowl," she snarled. "It makes me want to smash it." He bowed his head, accepting the anger like rain. They walked back toward Aruvia as the sky slid toward violet. At the edge of the village, Adaora and Ifunanya stood waiting, scarves tied tight, eyes red but clearer. "You smell of smoke and blood," Adaora said. "Both belong to us now," Mira said sad. "Listen to me. When the moon touches the court tiles, go to Father's hut. Bar the door. Do not come out until morning." "What are you going to do?" Ifunanya asked, fear softening her voice's old edges. "End a bargain," Mira said. In the court, torches had already found their flames. Darian sat like a lesson, legs crossed, hands steepled. The village gathered, pulled by hunger for spectacle and hope it will not cost them. Okafor stood alone beneath the shadow of a pillar, face gray as the ash that had stained Mira's fingers earlier. Their eyes met. He shook his head once, a slow no at the shape of the night, and then he nodded, small at the shape of his daughter. Mira stepped into the circle. Her hair hung loose, heavy as chain. Behind her, Obina waited at the edge, knife hidden at his back, breath measured. Darian's gaze slid between them and he smiled a god's smile. "I have already won." "Kneel," he said. Mira did not move. "Look carefully," she said to the gathered faces. "He thinks you came to watch me bow." "You came to watch him feed a murmur." Darian's eyes glittered. "Bravery performs well when it is sure it is being watched," he said. "Kneel." "No," she said. He lifted a finger. Guards moved. Obina stepped forward. So did Mira's hair. It rose like a wave, like a banner, like a thing finally tired of pretending it was not alive. It caught the first spear and snapped it, coiled a wrist and flung a man back into two others. Screams started, the kind that make children remember medals taste like pennies on the tongue. People scattered. Darian stood, fury uncloaking him. Mira! Okafor's voice, ragged. Choose! She understood. She had been letting her hair choose her. She had let Darian choose her. She had let the village choose her. She reached into herself for the place where the girl under the iroko had cried and then dreamed herself a crown anyway. Where the apprentice had become the master because knowledge is a kind of hunger too, but one that builds instead of hollowing. She threw her head back and shouted without sound. Take me. The hair turned inward like a river reversed. It climbed her neck, her face, her scalp, tightened until stars pricked the edges of her vision. It hurt like birth and breaking. She did not fight it. She hauled its weight into herself like hauling a net heavy with fish, and whispered a vow into the middle of it. You will not eat what I did not give you. The pressure eased. The hair slackened, loosened, fell. It lay against her back, drenched like it had been swimming. The guards froze. Darian's lips parted. For the first time, he looked afraid of a thing not holding a weapon. A whisper feathered her ear, low and furious. Clever girl. You think choosing is a door you can close behind you. But thirst returns. Then I will return to answer it, she said aloud and walked toward Darian, not quickly, because speed would make this a fight and she wanted a reckoning. He reached for his dagger. Obina moved, faster than fear, parried a guard, crossed the space between pillars in 3 strides. He slammed into Darian and drove him back into the dais. The prince's knife scraped Obina's side. Obina bit down on pain and locked his arm around Darian's throat, not to choke, simply to hold. Mira, he said, and said nothing else, the rest inside his eyes. She stopped an arm's length away. The hair on her shoulders lifted in a wind that did not exist. Darian spat in her direction, blood on his teeth. Kneel and I will let him live, he hissed. Stand, and I will tear him open and make this filth of a village watch. She smiled, small and terrible. You always imagined you were the mouth, she said. You were just the appetite. She stepped closer until her breath warmed his ear. I feed you to the thing you built, she whispered. And then I close it. Her hair rose, not to strangle, not to break, but to cover Darian's face gently as a veil. He bucked. Obina held. The hair pressed in. Mira pressed back against her own impulse to crush, to drink, to end. She refused that simplicity. She moved the hair like a surgeon moves a blade, searching for something under the skin of a man who believed he had none left worth finding. She found it. The small, hard knot where pride had calcified into cruelty. She wrapped it, squeezed until it cracked. Darian screamed, not the scream of a body, but the scream of a story losing its spine. When she pulled the hair away, he sagged. His eyes were wild and suddenly human. He looked at her and saw, perhaps for the first time, himself in a mirror he did not want. He crumpled to his knees and vomited on his own boots. The court's silence had a shape. It was the shape of a breath the whole village had held since the square and the slap. Someone sobbed once, brief and shocked, as if they had not given their throat permission. Mira turned to the people. I have fed enough, she said. I will feed no more. If you come to my door for miracles, you will leave with instructions and work. If you come with knives, you will leave without them. If you come with the prince, you will carry him home yourselves. She walked to Okafor. He touched her hair as if it were a wild animal that might bite if handled wrong, and then he touched her cheek as he had when she was small. You did not kneel, he said softly. I did, she said, and looked at Obina. But not to him. Darian dragged himself upright. Rage trembled through him, old habits clawing at new cracks. You will regret. No, she said, quiet and final. You will. She stepped aside and the village saw the prince alone for the first time. Obina released him. The guards did not move. The people did not move. Darian stumbled backward, stunned by the depth of the hole where his certainty had slept. He turned and fled the court not because anyone hunted him, but because he could not stand to be watched by eyes that had finally remembered how to measure a man. Mira sagged. The hair fell limp, as if exhausted by its hunger. Obina caught her before her knees struck tile. He lowered her onto the cool stone and the court came rushing back into itself. Noise, hands, questions. Adaora and Ifunanya broke their promise and ran to her, scarves still tight, but the skin beneath calmer. They fell to the floor and grabbed her wrists like anchors. Are we safe? Ifunanya whispered. No, Mira said, honesty like clean water. We are truer. Obina laughed, choked, and kissed her knuckles. Okafor exhaled a decade. Above them, the moon lifted its white coin higher. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, the forest breathed in and out, unbothered. Mira closed her eyes and listened to a new sound threaded under the familiar drum of her pulse. A hunger she had chosen to keep and carry, not to serve. It purred once and went quiet, like a thing that had learned the difference between being master and being held. And for a rare moment, Eruvia did not whisper. The day after the court broke its breath, the village behaved like a person trying not to limp. People walked softer, spoke lighter, waited for the sky to remember if it was safe to stay. Darien vanished into the palace and slammed the gates, and that would have been enough for a gentler story. But pride is not a door you close once. It's a hinge that keeps swinging until you tear it from the frame. Okafor lit 3 small fires in front of his hut and spat bitter cola into each until the smoke stopped pretending to be sweet. Adaora and Ifunanya slept on mats under a canopy of raffia. Their scalps no longer crawled. When Mira sat, the hair along her spine lifted and fell, restless, like a beast learning patience. Obina kept to the shade outside, whittling a stick to a point and then blunting it again, making and unmaking a spear as if practice could keep fate busy. At dusk, drums sounded from within the palace wall. Slow, ceremonial, the kind used when a king wants the knight to know he's planning something he will call justice. A messenger walked the central street in an orange sash and read from a palm leaf scroll in a voice that shook slightly and then steadied. By order of the Prince of Eruvia, there will be a cleansing at Moon's height. Those who carry curses will be unburdened before the gods. People stared at Mira as if the announcement were a bowl and she were the food inside. Cleansing, Obina said softly. A pretty word for a fire. Okafor's mouth bent down. He will seek an older mouth to speak through. He will borrow a darkness and call it Light Valora, Mira whispered, tasting the name like a bruise. Or what made Valora, Okafor said. He sat heavily and rubbed the scar along his wrist she'd always thought came from a thorn. Listen to me, Nwanyi. There's a truth I bent into silence when you were a child. Your mother's beauty did not come to her with only breath and bone. She went to the forest before I married her. She wanted me. Another wanted me too. Your mother fed the wrong tree a promise. I found out too late. I spent years untying it. You were born under my work and her wish. When you were small and hair would not cling to you, I thanked every god that listens to a father's fear because I believed it meant I had won. I did not think the forest was patient. Mira stared. You're saying, Mother? I am saying we are never the first to be foolish, he said, and managed a thin smile. But we might be the first to end it. Silence pressed in. Outside, someone shouted to a child about a basket, and the sound looked ordinary and felt like a lie. A pebble hit the doorframe. Obina went to the threshold and saw a boy he recognized as one of Darion's runners. The child's eyes were too old for his face. I was told to bring this, he said. He held out a small bundle wrapped in white cloth. If I screamed on the road, ghosts would hear, he added, solemn, as if reporting weather. Obina unwrapped it the way a hunter unwraps a wound, careful enough not to ruin what might still be used. Inside lay a lock of hair bound with gold thread. It was blacker than Mira's, heavier somehow, and it smelled of salt and smoke. When he touched it, it twitched. Mira's lip curled. He is collecting roots. Okafor leaned forward, frowned, then went very still. This is not yours, he said. It belongs to someone who has fed longer than our village has counted rains. Whose? Obina asked. The marsh woman from the salt flats, Okafor whispered. He went beyond our trees. He went to a woman who keeps names in jars. He brought back a thing that eats oaths. What will he do with it? Mira asked, though she already knew. Bind you, Okafor said, not your body. Your choosing, Obina wrapped the lock tight again and set it on the mat like it could learn the room if it looked too long. He glanced at Mira. We could run. We would only die tired, she said, not unkind. He will not be the last mouth. The curse will keep traveling my blood until someone starves it. Her voice did not shake. That frightened Obina more than any tremor could. Moon dragged itself up the spine of the sky. When it reached the court tiles, the palace gates opened. People drifted as if magnet pulled. Okafor took 2 gourds and slung them across his chest. Adaora and Ifunanya begged to come. He told them no, and they obeyed not because they wanted to, but because their fear finally understood the shape of the night. Stay close to me, he told Mira, and then to Obina, and closer to her. The court looked different under a cleansing. Torches were set not to warm faces, but to burn shadows off walls. In the center stood a bowl of stone veined with old black iron, a relic pulled from the river when Eruvia was still a child. It could hold fire for days. Darion stood beside it in white cloth, bare of ornament, wearing the seriousness of a man borrowing godhood. Beside him, a woman with hair like a waterfall of silver held an empty jar that pulsed as if it were not empty at all. Mira tasted salt where there was none. The marsh woman did not look up. She did not need to. Creatures that do not answer to doors always know who enters a room. Bring her, Darion said, voice smooth over a tremor of triumph. Mira stepped forward before anyone could pretend to drag her. Obina moved with her. Guards did nothing. Everything about the arrangement wanted to appear generous. Okafor went to the stone bowl and, without asking permission, spat into it. It hissed sour. Darion did not look at him. Tonight, he said, addressing the people, we pull thorns for meat. We return beauty to the gods. We ask forgiveness for our arrogance, and we cut it out like rot. Say your own name when you talk of rot, Okafor murmured. He was ignored by everyone but the marshwoman, who smiled a little because she enjoyed truth the way some enjoy salt on their tongue. She lifted her jar. This holds what holds you, she said to Mira, and finally her voice came like water over iron. A strand from the first bride who fed the forest a vow. Everything that fed after feeds through this. Break it, and a river will change its mind. How? Mira asked. Her hair stirred, tasting the air like a snake's tongue. Names, the woman said. The jar is fed with names, and it eats them until the thing without a name grows fat. You break it by giving it a name it cannot keep. What kind of name? Obina asked, though his bones had already guessed. One that costs you more than it can ever cost me, the woman said, pleased to be the knife rather than the wound for once. Darian's patience frayed. Enough riddles, he snapped. Bind her. The marsh woman tilted the jar. Sound poured out, whispers braided with weeping, the wet slide of river weeds, a word spoken in a forest long ago by someone who thought desire was destiny. The hair on Mira's head rose and pointed like a field of grass in a sudden wind. It reached toward the jar, and then recoiled in a shiver of greed and fear. The silver-haired woman smiled then, small and triumphant, because hunger always comes when called. Hold, Okafor said. He took a gourd from his chest, uncorked it, and poured a stream of dull black liquid into the stone bowl. The old iron veins drank it like blood. If the fire hisses sweetly, run, he whispered to himself, and sparked the rim. The flames leapt up the way a story does when a mouth knows where to blow. The hiss that came was not sweet. It was clean, green wood, rain on dust. People in the front sighed without knowing why. Darian gestured, impatient. Guards moved to take Mira's arms. Obina stepped in front and drew his knife in a single motion. Touch her, he said quietly, and I will teach your wrists a lesson. We do not need their hands, the marsh woman said, bored now. She tilted the jar further. The air thickened. Mira felt something cold and wet wind around her ankles, her calves, her knees. It climbed, not her hair, but through it. Roots without soil, craving without limit. Her heart kicked like a trapped deer. Name it, the woman said happily. Name the mouth. Feed us, Mira looked at Obina, and all the dumb, ordinary things they had not done together, sharing a bowl of weak stew, sleeping with sore feet and waking laughing, saying nothing for an entire afternoon because silence had been enough, stood up like witnesses. She wanted all of it so fiercely that the want itself became a flame, and in its heat she saw what the marshwoman meant. Some names are just sounds. Some names are doors. The only name that could not be kept was the one that would unmake her if she let it go. She took Obina's face in her hands. He had a cut along his jaw from the ravine. She traced it as if it were a path. Forgive me, she said, so. For what? He asked, even though a wiser part of him had started to understand the price of being the right answer. For giving up the only country I know, she said, and then she kissed him, slow and final, bone against bone, weeping and not stopping. And then she pulled back and spoke the name she had never said out loud because saying it would make it a thing that could die. She gave the jar his name, not Obina, the mouth sound. The Obina that lived between her ribs, the man as he existed in her memory. The hunter who took a boy's catapult and aimed it at a future no one else believed. The hands that held heat on Ifunanya's skull without flinching. The laugh that found her in the forest and stitched her back together when humiliation had unthreaded her. She spoke the whole of him, the way a river speaks of its source even when it has run too far to see it. The jar screamed. It wasn't a noise ears are meant to carry. People clapped hands to heads and fell to their knees. The silver-haired woman staggered, eyes wide, because this was a naming she had never tasted. One that fed and starved at the same time. The lock of hair inside the bundle Obina had brought thrashed like a snake on hot rock and turned to ash between breaths. The thing that had been climbing Mira fell back as if struck. Her hair snapped taut and then loosened all at once. The roots under the stone tiles withdrew with a rattling sob. In the stone bowl, the flames flared and then burned so steady you could hear the quiet inside them. Darian lurched, confused fury stamping its feet. What did you... Mira opened her eyes and looked at Obina, and did not know him. She blinked, the way you do when dust makes a lie of your vision. He took a half step forward and stopped when he saw it, the blankness where their shared days had lived. Something inside his chest folded in on itself. He did not make a sound. He straightened and nodded as if a bargain had been kept. In a way, it had. The marshwoman clutched the jar to her breast and laughed, breathless. Clever girl, she whispered, admiration a thread in the sound. You named a love story and cut your own throat. The jar cannot keep what you gave because it is already unmoored. You burned the rope and stepped off the boat. She looked at Darian and shrugged. The debt is paid. Darian stared from Mira to Obina to the quiet fire. He reached for rage and found only damp ash. The court watched their prince without fear for the first time, and that is a kind of violence no blade can answer. He took a step back, then two, and would have muttered something dignified if dignity had survived the evening. It had not. He fled again, smaller this time, and no one chased him. Okafor knelt, weeping, and kissed the dust near his daughter's feet. Adaora and Ifunanya burst from the crowd, sobbing, and wrapped themselves around Mira until her arms remembered how to hold. Mira held them like a woman returned from a long, ugly hunger. Obina set the whittled stick at the base of the stone bowl and turned away. He walked to the edge of the court, and then to the edge of the village, and then into the trees where names were less valuable, and the work of breathing did not require witnesses. For days after, Eruvia behaved like a person learning to use a leg that had healed crooked and been broken back into truth. The palace gates stayed shut. The marshwoman left before dawn, jar tucked beneath her arm like a child who had finally been made to behave. Okafor taught women how to boil salt and herbs and lay cloths on their scalps until the crawling stopped completely. He did not charge. He accepted yams and thank yous and silence. Mira cut her hair herself. She did it in the yard behind her father's hut at sunrise. Adeora stood beside her with a bowl. Ifunanya stood with a knife. Okafor sat on the step and did not pretend not to cry. The blade whispered through strands that had once moved like a storm, and now lay down like a sea after its wind has been convinced to leave. Mira sliced until she felt air on her skull for the first time since the day she chose to rub a dream into her skin. She smiled. It was not triumph, and it was not surrender. It was a thing without a name, so it was safe to keep. The village arrived in pieces. 1 woman, then 3 men, then a dozen children who had promised their mothers they would not stare, and then stared anyway. Mira turned, bald again, eyes clear, and bowed the smallest bow a person can bow without making themselves smaller. "I am Mira," she said to them all, polite as a blade. "A herbalist." Not a miracle, they breathed, some in disappointment, many in relief. Miracles are hungry pets. They bite the closest hand. Herbalists mix work with patience and leave your hands intact. Work returned. So did grief, because grief is faithful. People braided their hair or did not. The 2 sisters began to laugh again, first behind doors where it could warm up, then outdoors where it could stretch. Fires tasted like pepper and goat again rather than omen. The court filled with feet that were not afraid of echo. Obina did not come. He hunted the way a man hunts who has decided to become a rumor. He slept in shallow nests of grass and woke to birds that did not know him and that felt like kindness. When he crossed the ridge toward the marsh, he did not think of jars. When he killed a boar that had gored a farmer's son, he left it at the edge of the man's field without a word. When he heard his name spoken in the market, he turned his face until the voice slid off it like rain off oiled wood. On a market day, thick with heat, Mira walked between calabashes and pepper pyramids and baskets of fish that still smelled of the river's mouth. She wore a headscarf because the sun had no manners. A child tugged her cloth. "Auntie," the girl said, "is it true you married a hunter in a ravine?" Mira smiled. "People are always marrying people in ravines," she said lightly. The girl giggled and ran. Mira stood very still for a moment, as if listening for a footstep far away. She had a sense sometimes, right behind the breastbone, of a loss that did not ache so much as hum. She did not know why it hummed. She had not learned the song. She kept walking. At the edge of the stalls, a man with a shallow scar along his jaw handed a butcher a wild goat and spoke quietly about the cut he wanted. When he turned, the space between him and Mira filled with air that had been held a very long time. They looked at one another. Recognition did not come like a thunderclap. It came like the smell of rain arriving half a day before the clouds commit. Something in Mira shifted toward him. Something in Obina reached for her and stopped itself, then reached again, smaller, which is often stronger. "Good day," he said, because there are days when brave words run away and the small ones are the only soldiers left. "Good day," she said, and the air agreed and did not rush them. They passed each other the way a road passes a river, close enough to touch, wise enough not to presume. After 3 steps, Mira looked back over her shoulder for no reason she could have explained. Obina did the same. They did not smile. They took each other in like medicine. Bitter, necessary, good. By harvest, the prince had become a rumor too. He rode out one morning with a small retinue and did not return. Some said he went to the salt flats to find new jars. Some said he followed the marshwoman and learned his name could not be stored anywhere that would keep it safe from himself. Some said he drowned in a river he thought he could order to change its course. Stories grew where facts were too tired to stand. Eruvia learned a different way of measuring beauty. Mothers told their daughters beauty is work you do with your hands and a decision you make with your spine. They told their sons that power borrowed from humiliation comes with a debt that will arrive at your door at night and take what you did not intend to pay. Under the Iroko, new leaves budded where the ground had been scorched. Children dared each other to touch the ash and squealed when adults shouted and then laughed. Okafor planted bitter plants in the clearing and taught anyone who asked how to boil them without lying to their tongues. He began to sleep through the night again. Not because worry had died, but because it had found a chair and sat instead of pacing. Mira's bald head shone in the sun and under moonlight, and in the dimness where stories are born. Sometimes, when she combed wigs for clients who preferred other choices, her scalp tingled and she felt something like a purr. She would put the comb down and whisper, "No." It would quiet. It was not a master anymore. It was a cat she fed and kept from birds. One evening she walked to the ravine without thinking about feet or destination. The light there behaves differently, as if even sun and shadow remember how a life can change between 2 walls of rock. Obina was sitting on the ledge with his feet hanging, whittling nothing into something again. She cleared her throat. He glanced up and made room without looking surprised. "The river is low," he said. "Everything learns to be small when heat insists. she said, and he made a soft sound that might have been a laugh. They sat. Frogs announced themselves to the night. Wind told leaves tonight's gossip. They did not fill the air with questions words cannot answer without bleeding. That restraint felt like a faith. When she stood to go, she touched his shoulder, light, as if testing a door she did not plan to open yet. He covered her hand with his for 1 second and let it go. When she walked away, her scalp hummed. She said no without anger. It obeyed. That should be where a kind teller leaves you, on the edge of warmth, letting your own wanting fertilize the rest. But Eruvia deserved better than a lie, and so do you. On the first heavy rain of the next season, lightning found the palace roof and showed it what fire remembers. The court burned before anyone could decide if it should be saved. Darian returned with a handful of men in time to see his father's day as cracked and blackened, and the iron-veined bowl split into 2 neat halves like a seed. He stood in the rain and wept the way a child weeps. Loud, messy, honest. He turned toward the village with something sharp in his eyes and stopped when he saw the faces waiting for him. They were not armed. They were not cruel. They were decided. He put his hand over his mouth to keep the old shape of his words from coming out. Then he put the hand down and nodded once to no one in particular. He walked away. No one followed. Winter arrived smelling of smoke and cassava. The marsh woman did not return. A boy named his fishing boat Mira and another named his hunting dog Obinna, and both creatures behaved stubbornly but pulled their weight when it counted. Rumors thinned into stories. Stories thickened into lessons. Lessons sometimes forgot the blood they were built on and had to be reminded gently by old men who sat under the tree and began, No, that is not how it happened. Listen. And in a hut with a clean yard and 3 mats aired each morning, a woman with a bright eye and a bare scalp ground pepper leaves and boiled salt and stitched her days into a kind of crown no one could place on her and no wind could take. On a morning when the light was the color of a ripe pawpaw and the market smelled like endings pretending to be beginnings, a man with a scar along his jaw paused at her stall and asked if she had anything for a sleep that arrived too quickly in the afternoon. She gave him bitter cola and instructions. He paid in coins and then in a small smile that arrived late and stayed too long. She watched him go. She discovered she was smiling too. Sometimes, the mouth you feed isn't a curse. It's a future. If you were listening, you heard the shock arrive much earlier, the night a woman named her love to save a village and woke without him. If you were hungry for a second shock, take this. There are losses that never scar, and there are healings that leave marks you stroke like talismans. Mira did not get her memories back. She built new ones in the same place, with the same man, with different steps. The old love did not need to be remembered to be true. It only needed to be lived again. The forest approved. The river took note. The marsh woman, miles away, poured a little of something that might have been respect into the dirt for a girl clever enough to starve a jar without breaking it. And Eruvia learned to celebrate a queen with no crown. If this story gripped you, tap to subscribe, drop a comment with the moment that shocked you most, and share it with someone who loves raw cinematic tales. New stories just like this every week.